everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Appreciate it in advance. This week, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about generational differences in the workplace and specifically Gen Z, which I think we might have talked about a little bit before on the podcast, but definitely not enough, because the generational differences and the number of generations in the workplace is pretty significant these days. So to do this, I have on my guest here, Meghan, who has heard the line millennials are killing the fill in the blank industry one too many times and has channeled her energy into helping people create more collaborative experiences across generations since 2014. Dr. Meghan Grace is a leading generational expert whose research on Gen Z spans the last decade and has helped companies, universities, and associations around the world understand generations to work better together. Meghan prioritizes understanding the human experience while providing data-informed insights about generations. Guided by multiple studies, Dr. Grace helps connect the dots between getting to know a generation and knowing what makes them tick. She is the host of the podcast #GenZ and has co-authored 3 books on Generation Z, with her new book, Generations in the World of Work, coming out later this year. When she isn't researching, speaking, writing, or podcasting about generations, she co-leads the Institute for Generational Research and Education. Dr. Grace, Meghan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, we can go by Meghan. I feel like when we intro with the doctor, they're like, can you give me medical advice? And I'm like, absolutely not. I mean, we can Google your symptoms together. No, doctor in education, still a very valid one. Our First Lady Jill Biden has one. But it's wonderful to be here, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much. And as I had mentioned at the top of the podcast, there's so much to discuss when it comes to generations, generational differences, how they impact the workplace. But obviously, it goes without saying, as we read in your bio, that Gen Z, and especially given that this is a whole podcast for you, is a major focus point for you, not only in your research, but also in what you share and what you're passionate about talking about. So maybe we have to start there. Maybe we need to start with, who is Gen Z? Who are they made up of? What ages are they? And what are some of the differences that we see related to Gen Z specifically?
Yeah, so Gen Z, we use the age range of 1995 to 2010. So when we're thinking about who those people are in society in this day of 2024, that is college students, like some high school students who are seeing like they're kind of growing out of high school, predominantly in college. They are the predominant college population, but they're also that young adult new hire in most industries. So think anything from 18 to almost 30, 18 to 29. They're turning 30 next year. If everyone wants to feel elderly, the oldest of Gen Z will be 30 next year. They're freaking out. We're freaking out. Everybody's freaking out. But so they are really squarely in higher education, and higher ed has been hanging out with them for a little while and trying to pivot and adapt to this generation and like the demographic shift, not only in like who they are, but the sheer number of them, or smaller number of them is the better way to put that. But the corporate space and the world of work is really, they were sneaking in there, and they're pretty solidly almost 10 years of them in the workspace now. So many of them are, I don't know where we put that cutoff of like approaching of their mid-career, but some of them have been in roles for 5 to 7 years now. And so they're there. They have their workplace habits, and they are, I don't want to say shaking up the world of work. They are doing what a new generation does when they get to a new phase of life, which is bring their own perspectives and their own values, behaviors, trends, mindsets into those environments. They did it in education. They've done it as they've gone to college, and they're doing it again as they're going into work. They're going to do it as they more predominantly become parents and leading families. And so that's just like the interesting thing when we're thinking about this generation is it's not like they were quietly entering, right? Like we actually have millennials are the most studied generation to date. Gen Z is like right after them. And that's just the advancement of being able to study large groups of people and like conduct demographic studies like we oftentimes do.
Right.
So with this generation, I mean, we know the age range. We know that this generation is, if you're paying attention to people within that age, they're very socially driven. Not in the idea of like, I need to have a lot of friends, but really this mindset of like social change oriented and trying to make the world a better place. Like that's a big motivation of theirs, is helping others. But they're also very digital, very digitally defined generation. It's not the only thing that defines this generation, but it is something that's unique. Like they cannot picture a world when we did not have the internet. They just can't fathom it. Not a single day.
Wow. When you put it
And
that
so like
way.
that's just like a very different, like millennials, I think we've been on the train of being like, technology is good, let's learn new
Yeah.
technology. But we could also be like, we knew there was a time when we didn't have it, and like, or it was very slow, or it was more of a
Yes.
commodity as opposed to like a necessity. For Gen Z, it's always been a necessity. Like they really don't have any conscious memories before the iPhone.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. So like things to like think about is the way that technology is adapted alongside them, while they're also just developing what are normal human life skills of communication, navigating the
Yeah.
world, understanding people, getting jobs, going to school. Technology has been such a strong undercurrent for this generation, and it's just really, it's embedded in their DNA, but they also recognize like the double-edged sword that technology plays. So
Yeah.
that's like just a snippet about Gen Z. I know there's so much more we could talk about, but and I know that we'll get there. But that
Yes.
is just like the really quick and the quick and the dirty of who they are. It's this, the young adult generation, the latter teens. They're really in that, I think, that unique malleable time in life, which is actually when we want to study generations, is when they are developing and forming their
Yeah.
personal worldview, their identity set, their values. So from a generational lens, that's when like generational theorists like myself come in and we're like, ooh, this is the time to understand this group. Like we don't want to do it
That's
any earlier because
right.
we don't, I mean, when you're 12, you're not, yes, you're developing who you are, but you're not fully there yet. A lot of it is the understanding through the lens of your parents, your guardians, your family members, and like your immediate circle. It's not till we get to those teen and young adult years that we really can start to develop what would be like a generational identity.
That is so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I am still a little hung up on this understanding that that Gen Z does not really have a view of the world without some of these critical advances in technology, like the iPhone, like non-dial-up internet. Because I think about dial-up, I can hear the sound. I
Mm-hmm.
distinctly remember what life was like before having a computer and after having a computer, which certainly was a commodity, I would say. It's just so interesting because I feel like I might sound like the boomer that said millennials are this, millennials are that, when I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
Gen Z is like this and Gen Z is like that. But actually, that is kind of the beauty of having generational differences, is that we have our own generational identity, to your point, and
Mm-hmm.
we compare ourselves to other generations. Just like as a millennial, I can compare myself to Gen X or the boomers, who my parents are. And so it's just like really interesting to me. And given all the research that you've done, I'm curious, especially from a theoretical standpoint, are there predictions on what Gen Z will be like when they are even they probably are already decision makers in business, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe more broadly, regardless of whether they're decision makers or not, what Gen Z will be like in the workforce as time continues to pass and
Yeah.
as other generations then are added to the workforce.
Yeah, so we're actually probably in a really good place with having spent about 10 years thinking about Gen Z as young adults. Like I frame them all kind of as young adults. Um, we have about 10 years of our understanding of them. And so what we tend to do in, yes, there's actual social science that goes into understanding generations. People probably, they probably think it's like a BuzzFeed quiz. But it's really being able to like know how the human identity is shaped, and then how do we do that as a collective in response to society. So like that's like the really quick and dirty of like how we would understand a generation. When we're looking at Gen Z, we've been looking at them for about 10 years in this kind of like lens of life. and thinking about the things that influence a generation, we tend to look at what are the things technologically going on, what are the things in society from like a social issues perspective, what are the things going on economically, and then what are the things that are going on like politically and government wise, like what is the kind of like the geopolitical landscape that they live in, because all of those things are intertwined, like they're so coupled together. So really we take a good hard look at life and what society is doling out to them during those years, and we say, how are people going to respond to that? And like when we've looked at Gen Z, there have been some really clear markers, right? Like the technological advancement and how it allows people to connect and be informed. Like that's a big one for Gen Z, like being informed and connected in a very unique way that's different than previous generations. But we've also seen that they've lived through, and what millennials, like we kind of feel like we're all together in this one, is like unprecedented times where we kind of always feel like we're living through another historical event every single day. And a relative for Gen Z looking at that and saying, well, like 2008 recession happened. That wasn't great. Started jobs in the middle of the pandemic. That wasn't great. There's war all over the place. Apparently, like the climate is on fire and we can't even go to school and be safe. So like Gen Z looks at the world and they're kind of like, it's scary out there and a future is not certain. That it's been present for like the last 10 years of them developing their worldview, is like what the world is spitting back to them is like, first of all, it's scary out here. Second of all, it's expensive out here. And so they're very like, it's this interesting balance that they bring to it of like being very cognizant of the fact that there's problems in the world and that they have to take care of themselves to even be able to navigate those problems. The other piece of it is they're like, I don't want to say they're doomsday preppers, but they are always kind of prepared for the next rainy day, whether that's financially or trying to think about some level of uncertainty. And when we think about like the major issues that they tend to tell us that they care about in all of our studies, it is there's this undercurrent of wanting stability in their own personal lives, stable housing, access to healthcare, stable jobs. Like they're not asking for like everyone to have a starting salary of 6 figures. They're like, I want to pay my bills and be able to support my family. Wild stuff. And then the other piece of it, like while it feels like they're laden with like what sounds like a terrible adulthood, they also deeply care about making the world a better place. Like they look at the world and they say, this is not so great sometimes, but there's so much opportunity to improve things. And I think when we look at how they are really driven by making the world a better place, I put quotes around that because everyone's world feels different, and helping people out. What we, I think, are prepared for in the workplace, to really get to your question, is that this generation kind of brings a balance of nihilism and optimism at the same time. This idea that like, let's be real about the big issues in our world and let's also do what we can to make it better at the same time. And I think that that to me, what I hear from a workplace perspective is this is a generation that is, if given the opportunity and engaged in the right way, are going to be the people that are going to help improve some of the cultural issues we have within our workplaces, as well as just the opportunity to make things more efficient and potentially operate a little bit better. Because this is a very much so a generation that's like, let's work smarter, not harder on this one, people.
Right.
And
I love that. And not to cut you off, I'm sure you have more to add to that. But when I think about that, especially, I do think about something that you said a little bit earlier, which was around this, kind of being the catalyst for a lot of change. I don't think I'm quoting you verbatim there, but I did an episode maybe sometime last year, around how Gen Z is really quite admirable for their approach to workplace challenges, in my opinion, because I think it was at that time that I was seeing a lot of these trends where people, especially those in Gen Z, were challenging the status quo, and they were saying, hey, if you're not going to change the way that you interact with me and the people that I work with, meaning businesses, leaders, etc., and you're not going to make this a better place to work, I'm going to go. And I'm going to go and find something else. And I remember reflecting on my own experience in some challenging environments in my past, where I was like, I've got to make it work. I'm lucky to have a job, and, jobs are hard to come by. And I remember in that episode thinking, well, that is such a such a drastic difference in response to cultural workplace challenges. And as a millennial, like, I can honestly reflect on being told that, you know, you have to respect authority, and no matter what someone says, like, if they are higher ranking, like, you're going to have to follow direction, and challenging the status quo could mean that you're making waves in your job or in your experience. It could mean that you get fired, and if you get fired, then what are you going to do? And even though I am a self-proclaimed challenger of the status quo, I think I can do that now because I feel more stable in my career. But early on, I would never think of really making waves, maybe like teeny tiny little ripples. But I think Gen Z is in very, very many ways the antithesis to that perspective, because they are like, well, I don't have to stay here. I can go and find another job. I can go and be an influencer. I can create my own company. Like, there's just such a drastic difference, and I really applaud them for that. You know, obviously I'm speaking very generally here, but that's my initial thought on what you've shared.
Well, and I think that Gen Z kind of has this mindset of like, you don't need me, like, or I don't need you as much as you need me, right? And like, they do have more opportunity, and it kind of just feels like they have this like absolute unwavering spirit of entrepreneurship, even when they're working within a company and they didn't start it and they don't own it. Like, this idea of improvement and solving a problem, like, that's what an entrepreneurial mindset actually is doing business to solve a problem.
Right.
And I think for them, they are drawn to entrepreneurship for the flexibility, for the freedom, right? Everybody wants that. Anyone that's like, oh, they don't want to work, I'm like, you have been lied to. I think that for Gen Z, they look at it, and I don't even know if it's like challenging the status quo or being disrespectful. It's questioning because they don't know what they don't know. And so they might ask a question about a policy, and it'll come across as like, well, maybe they were being disrespectful because they don't want to follow the policy. But in reality, they're like, hey, I'm new here. I don't know why this policy exists. Can you please give me some background on this? And people kind of take that personally for whatever reason. And I'm like, don't take it personally. They don't know what they don't know. They're new here. You at one point didn't know that either. And I think for millennials, we were very much so told, like, show up, do your job, listen to the boss, follow the rules, and you'll be rewarded. Once again, we fell for the scam. And that's not always the case. Like, it is not always the case. And Gen Z's like, I'm not going to be scammed by this. I want you to be honest with me, and I want you to be true with me. And millennials, we really did. And it comes from, because that model worked for our baby boomer parents. The economy changed so drastically, and the workforce changed so drastically right around the 2000s and the dot-com era, when technology really did shake up a lot in the way that we thought about work. And it impacted millennials, and the economy shifted in this mindset. But we were playing by rules. Millennials were playing by rules that were designed for and by baby boomers. The Gen Xers, it wasn't disadvantaging them. And so, like, we look at it and we're like, how bold of these Gen Zers to come in and ask these questions. I would have never done that. But that's also, we're just given a set of rules that really, I don't think was designed for millennials to succeed. And I love the tenacity of Gen Z, because again, I've had to do a lot of self-coaching, like when students or interns or newer hires ask questions, like, why is it like this? And I don't take it as like, why are you like that, Megan? It's more like, can you explain to me the historical context of why things are the way that they are? And then they might say, but what if we did X, Y, and Z, and it saved us 5 hours a week? And you're like, you're a genius, right? It's this mindset of, don't get mad about it. Just answer the question and see where that conversation takes you. But it's just, I could go on and on about like this misconception around Gen Z of being like, they want to shake up the challenge, like status quo, and they want to break everything. I'm like, no, Jen, they're not getting together. I promise you, they're not getting together on the corners of the internet to say, let's go make all our bosses mad.
Right. No, they just are asking questions that we might not have asked before or answered before. Fresh
set of eyes. We hire consultants for that.
Yeah, it's really true. We do. Yeah. Every company pretty much does. So now that we know much more clearly who Gen Z is and what they're like, and more often than not in the workplace, what are some things that could create, let's say, because it doesn't always, but what are some things that could create tension between intergenerational workforces and generational differences in the workforce? Because certainly I'm sure you and I can think of a time where we might have clashed with a different generation because of the way that we work or the way that we think. So what are some of those things that listeners might want to keep an eye out for?
So I think for Gen Z especially, they are incredibly protective of one, their self-worth and their self-care. And I don't think there's been other generations who have gone in and been like, I'm going to sacrifice my life, my happiness, and potentially my family to have this job. Gen Z's like, that's a heap of garbage. We're not doing that. And they're doing it at such a young age. And so again, it comes back to like other generations look at that and they're like, the audacity of the youth to say that this job isn't important. And they're like, no, it's important to me that 8 hours a day that you pay me to be here and to care. My nights, my weekends, not as big of a deal. So I think the workaholic nature of some previous generations, there's going to be this clashing of like, they don't seem as committed. And it's like, they might just be appropriately and at a healthy level committed to their jobs. Because this generation is, I think, much louder about the mindset of like, I'm working to live, not living to work. Where previous generations, we've been told you need to live to work, you need to cut your teeth until you're about 45 and you're the senior manager and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's true.
And Gen Z's like, nope, not doing that. And so this mindset of like, yeah, your Gen Z employees might sign off at 5 and you probably won't hear from them until 9 a.m. the next day, unless they have opted into taking on a flexible work environment where they might not clock in until 10 a.m. They might work until 3, but then they're going to cram out work from 8 to 10 p.m. and they're going to get the same amount of work done. And so this element, I just think that their desire for flexibility, the element of fluidity, and then this preservation of taking care of their human self is going to rub wrong against some older generations who have just been like, that's not how you get ahead in the world. And they're like, I don't care about getting ahead in the world. I just want a job and I just want my paycheck. And that's okay.
Yeah, especially thinking about that. If an older generation is managing a member of Gen Z, and even in a flexible work environment, if there's a lack of trust or even from this older generation really not understanding that this is just kind of part and parcel for who Gen Z is and how they prefer to operate, that there's like this enforcement potentially of what quote unquote is the right way to work. And we see this already. It might not even be with Gen Z. It could be with millennials. I'm a millennial who really appreciates flexibility in work. And I don't think I'd be really happy if someone was like, no, you have to work this amount of hours at this certain part of the day, and there's no flexibility in that. And so I could see there being tension created from that also, which is really what you were saying too, around what potentially is seen as being an effective way of working, which isn't necessarily, as we know, even from the pandemic and the way of working totally changing and being turned on its head. We know that there are people who believe that the right way of working is X and the right way of working is Y for another person or from a different generation. And I think, if anything, we've learned that there isn't really just one way of working. We've even known this for those who are neurodivergent, that there are different ways for people to work, and the end result could be the same. It's just a matter of how they got to that end result could look totally different. Yeah. So I think that's reasonable.
And if I can, like, I always want to kind of point out some of the stuff we found in our studies. Like, we did a replication study from 2014 to 2021. And like, we asked Gen Z to tell us the top characteristics of what best describes them. Consistently across those 2 years, different groups of Gen Zers, but similar lists. Responsibility was one of the top characteristics. Being responsible was one of the things that they identify with most. And sometimes people will say, like, you can't be talking about the people on my team. But that also comes down to, who do they feel responsible to? It's not someone that they can't trust. It's not someone that peers over their shoulder. It's not someone that treats them like a child. It's not someone that is constantly micromanaging them. Responsibility comes, and feeling responsible to someone knows that it's a reciprocal relationship. And so if you want to leverage the best characteristics and traits of Gen Z, you have to build an honest and authentic relationship with them and show that you care about them. And that's like with any employee group, but like with this generation, they need to know that that's an honest an authentic relationship, not a surface level transactional relationship.
Right, right. Where other generations might be able to just kind of go with it and allow that surface level transactional relationship to live and exist because they're just making it work. For Gen Z, it's a more critical, like, must have in order for them to feel satisfied in the workplace.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
really interesting. Yeah, super interesting. I mean, of course, most of the listeners are in HR or trying to break into HR. And the majority of listeners are either Gen Z, millennials. Let me think. It's like 25 to 46 is the majority of listeners of this podcast. So what is that? That's Gen Z and millennials, right? At this point, 46 is, yeah. So when I think about that, it's also, to your point, like some people are probably, depending on where we define like mid-level in their careers, they could be decision makers, they could be at senior parts of their careers or in senior leadership roles. And I think there is a real responsibility, coming back to a critical word for Gen Z, a real responsibility for listeners who are thinking about ways that they can impact their own workplace, to really think about, rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach to solving problems, really thinking about who makes up their workforce. How do we solve problems depending on potentially which generations are represented, because those problems could be different. They could be the same, but they could look different for each cohort depending on where they sit. And I just think, hearing some of the research that you've done and some of the outcomes that your research has realized, in a way, it helps me to even think about my role and how even driving engagement within a team or within a department or company could even look a little bit different. So I'm curious, in your research or in what you've seen, are there ways that HR leaders or business leaders in general can better engage their employees, especially Gen Z, because knowing what we know, that there is a very clear delineation between work and home, or work and personal life, does engaging that population look a little bit different too?
Yeah, I think where the intersection of my work and your work comes together is this idea of like bringing human back into things. Gen Z has lived their life online. They crave human connection. They actually will constantly say, like, I would like to connect with people in person. I'm a little apprehensive to do so because I spent 2 years in my home. Like, and at a critical time when they should have been learning interpersonal skill development. And so I think that when I think about what HR leaders can really do is, like, you and I both know that HR gets like a bad rap for just being like the compliance policy people, when in reality, like, human is right in the name. And like, they want human connection. I'm not saying go be their friend, but there's a way to have a good relationship with those people and to be an honest and real person. I think about one of my favorite HR people at a job that I had. It was just like the nicest lady in the world that acted she's definitely baby boomer, but she acted like she was our aunt. Like, everybody, like, we were a bunch of really young millennials in the office, and she acted like our aunt. She was like, you got a dentist? You need a dentist. Here's a dentist. You need a doctor? Here's a doctor. Here's how you get your, like, she actually recognized where we're at in our lives and was like, you 26-year-olds need to get your teeth looked at, and you need to make sure you're like going and getting your primary care checkup. So it's like this idea of like care and human connection. And yes, though, the work needs to get done. But I've always been a fan, and I see this especially with this generation, the work will get done if they know the human that it impacts. They need to know you before they can buy into you. You can't expect to say, well, I'm the senior manager of HR, and then be like, okay, your rules junkie, like, what do you want from me? It's this matter of like, no, Tracy's awesome. Tracy helps us, and she's a real person and a real human that I have a connection to. So yeah, I do need to follow up about like that policy stuff or whatever it might have been. There's this idea that there's an opportunity, I think, regardless if you're in HR or you're just a manager, Gen Z wants human connection. We all do. But we have to remember that they went through a really weird period of time where they didn't get to have that human connection at a pivotal time when their young adult brains are literally wired to learn how to develop relationships.
Yeah. That's so important. I really love everything that you said, and I was really giggling a lot at some of the ways that you said it. And I mean, it really makes so much sense to me. I think actually, I'll share an anecdote here too. I was speaking recently with one of our employees who is a member of Gen Z and very successful recent college grad who went to a top school and is in a very important and critical job for us. And she was talking to me about how, I don't want to say desperately, but in a way, like how eager she was to meet people in person. We all work remotely, and there aren't many people in her city, let alone in her state. And she was like, I really, like, I wish that I had more of that connection. I love what I do. I love the work that I do. I love where I work, but I just, there's something missing for me. Basically, that's the message that at least I received. And without putting words in her mouth, I think there is, and I'm putting her experience with other experiences of Gen Z employees that I've either worked with in the past or have worked with recently, who I've spoken with, who really do emphasize that need for in-person connection. And I remember one of the first times that she and I had connected, she told me that part of her college experience was at home, and she was taking classes online. And I remember, at least, like, just for me, when I got my master's, I was doing it online by choice. And I remember during COVID, I was thinking about how sorry I felt for students in that present moment who didn't get the opportunities that I had of being in person for college, or for some high schoolers or middle schoolers or elementary schoolers. And I remember reflecting on how different I might have turned out if I didn't have some of those critical years of development. And to your point, those moments that were so crucial to our development within interpersonal skills. And, I think, I guess I think as an HR professional that there's always going to be a reason not to meet in person, because it costs X amount, or because it's a lot of work, and it, requires all of these logistics and planning and all of that jazz. But when I think about the ROI and the return on that investment, it's probably so great. Especially when we think about who is going to be in that cohort of people meeting together. So, I mean, it reiterated for me that there is so much that someone who is a member of Gen Z is yearning for, and that personal connection is so, so important. So that is my anecdote there.
Yeah, and if I can chime in there for our friends that are working for predominantly remote companies, and it's hard to be like, how do you simulate in person, right? And I've worked for a fully remote company, and I was like, I was in HR, but I was like people culture, right? And something we did was we instituted, like, everybody got X amount of dollars per week to go work at a coffee shop, because it was just like getting out of your home and interacting with humans, like the barista, the other people at the other table, or like to go to a co-working space, something. It was like, I called it like the get out the house money, like get out the house and like go be with the humans. Our actual HR called it, like, I forget, like the coffee stipend, but it was like, I always joked, I'm like, if you didn't use your get out the house money, that's on you. Like, you cannot complain that you
I
don't
like
feel
that
connected.
one better.
But the other piece of it is, managers out there, like, you have so much control to like make this a good experience for people. And every young person, but like Gen Z that I've worked with, say that I have a 30-minute weekly check-in scheduled for them. I schedule it for 45, and I intentionally, for lack of better words, am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, why not?
I call it the shoot the shit 10 minutes. Like, what are we talking about? Silly nonsense. Like, it doesn't, like, because those 10 minutes I can sacrifice to know that for the next 30, I'm going to have those young people locked in, because we've just spent 10 minutes building a relationship. And that's an opportunity for that informal mentoring that so many Gen Zers want. That's an opportunity to buy into what's going on in their life and realize that, like, yes, the whole world feels like it's on fire all the time, but at least we have a little bit of a human connection. And so, like, I find those 10 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to just honestly shoot the shit and do nothing, and like honestly have friend time, not best friend time, but just like friend time.
Talk about anything. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about anything is so helpful because it also just shows like I'm willing to give you some time. And I never say like, okay, 10 minutes is over. It's a natural progression because young people and anybody really comes to a meeting with their supervisor or someone and says, I mean, we have to get this done because we have an agenda. So that naturally does transition at about the 7 to 10 minute mark into like, let's accomplish the things we said we were going to talk about on this call. But you're making memories, you're spending time with people. And I really do think that time is the most valuable asset of any company. And yes, we should be having purposeful meetings, but people that are more connected to their work, this is in like every study ever done by like McKinsey and PwC, people that are more connected to the people they work with are more likely to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't find connection over spreadsheets. I'm sorry, you just don't.
No, you don't. I love that. I think everyone should add shoot the shit time to their one-on-ones, their touch bases. I'm into that. I'm adding that to my repertoire.
Dude, what are you talking about? Don't know yet, but it's going to be a nice time.
Yeah, right. That's amazing. Meghan, I can't thank you enough for sharing all of your insights and like the research that you've done, like extensive research that you've done. And I'm super excited to celebrate you when you have your new book come out, and maybe it's out by the time this episode airs, but either way, we'll make sure everyone knows where to connect with you and learn more in the show notes. But I just so appreciate you sharing more. And I guess just so those who want to hear it from you, where can they connect? And of course, the links, as I mentioned, will be in the show notes.
Yeah, my website is kind of a good hub, meghanmgrace.com. Meghan is spelled Meghan. I've got that extra H in there because I'm Irish. My parents needed to keep it cultural. But the other places, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram and Threads. But I do give you the caveat, if you follow me on Threads, it's mostly just me talking about the TV I'm watching. So if you need to turn your brain off, that's also a good place to hang out. But you can find me on social media at Meghan M. Grace everywhere. And then we do have a website for our Institute for Generational Research and Education. And that is Institute for, like the number 4, gens.com. And then we're also on LinkedIn. So we share kind of across those more formally, some of those things. But I'm pretty easy to find if you know how to spell my name.
Love that. We'll definitely make sure it's spelled correctly, both in the episode info and the show notes, of course. But thank you so much. And I'm excited to be on your podcast as well. So for the listeners who want to catch me there and hear more of Meghan's wise words of wisdom and other guests that she's had on, make sure you check out the #GenZ podcast. Meghan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.